afternoon, and thank you for sticking with us. This is still your number one radio station, African Patriot Radio. It's time for Even the Odds. You know how we do it on this program. We're all about conflict resolution and peace building. My name is Akanem, and I have with me today in the studio Mr. Cliff Guy, who is head of programs for an NGO called Women Environmental Program, WEP for short. Good afternoon, sir. Thank you for joining us today.
Afternoon, and it's good to be here.
But it's good to have you here.
Thank you.
All right. So today on the program, we would actually be talking about insecurity, and our focus will be on the Kaduna crisis, the ongoing Kaduna crisis. And I mean, it's no longer a thing that's been hidden. Basically, everyone knows about what's going on in Kaduna, especially southern Kaduna. And Kaduna is actually, from research carried on, things for those of us that were born back as far back as the early 1980s, Kaduna has actually been experiencing rounds of violence at different times with different causative factors and all of that, different magnitudes as well. And even as early as 1980s, like I said, there were already like a lot of disagreement between clans. Well, most of the crises we had back then were mainly communal crises, but now over the years it has, should I say, expanded. It has extended to like other forms of crisis. Now let's talk about insecurity on its own, sir. How would you define insecurity? What would you say it is to you?
Thank you very much. I'd like to say that insecurity, in practical terms, is a situation where individuals, groups, or communities are no longer safe in their places of abode where they live, or the places where they work, and they can no longer go about their businesses and with that feeling of being safe. Now, it's fundamental for every human being to feel safe in whatever environment they find themselves in. So when there is a situation of insecurity, individuals no longer have that feeling of feeling safe, that, okay, this is where I live. For instance, we are here in Kuzape, we work here. So if you can no longer sit here and feel safe and secure that your environment is peaceful, is calm, is safe, and is devoid of any form of harassment, intimidation, or potential harm to you as a person. When you have those feelings, we can say that there is a situation of insecurity. So it's the absence of that feeling of being safe and secure in whatever space that you operate at all.
So invariably now what we're saying, the residents of Kaduna State are basically in a state of insecurity.
Definitely, because they can't feel safe anymore. They can't go about their businesses without having to look over their shoulders and all that. So and it's a very terrible state for a human being to be in, because psychologically it affects every other aspect of your life. So as humans, one of our basic needs is to feel secure and safe in whatever space that we operate. And once that is not there, it is going to invariably affect every other functioning for you as a person.
All right, sir. I would actually like to ask, what is going on in Kaduna State right now? A lot of people have come out to give different reasons why it's happening or causes of this. And some people have even gone as far as saying that they would not describe what is happening as a crisis or unprovoked attacks. So how would you describe the situation in Kaduna right now?
It's obviously a conflict. It's obviously a crisis, because you have, from what we see in the news and other sources of information, you know that for every conflict, there are usually two parties. And I would also like to add that what is happening in Kaduna is, I believe we are talking about that right now because it is what is currently going on as well. But it's just a snapshot of some of the things that are experienced in communities across the country. So Nigeria, as we have it now, has a lot of conflicts and all that going
and
on
different
here
parts of
and
the
there in
country.
different parts of the country. So yes, I'll say it's a conflict, and I'll say it's a crisis, and I'll say it's violent confrontations that are going on in communities in that part of the country right now.
Okay. What would we say are some of the causes of these things that are occurring in Kaduna?
Okay, what is happening in Kaduna is like I said earlier, it's a picture
Yeah.
of what you find happening in communities, most communities across the country. And talking about causes, I know that a lot of people have come out to say a lot of things in terms of what is responsible for
For
all
it.
that we have.
Yes.
But I'd like to say that we, in looking at conflict in any part of the country, I think we start to look at how Nigeria was formed in the first instance. The process of the emergence of Nigeria as a nation state
Okay.
was such that it left us in a situation where communities or states have those tendencies for these kind of things to happen. Now, why do I say that? We have so many different religions, we have so many tribes, ethnicities, different cultures existing in the different states that we have in the country. And in most instances, this leaves us with a situation where you have some people referring to themselves as the majority,
Yeah.
and then you have others calling themselves the minority, and in the competition for access to resources that are always scarce. Economists will tell us that
Yeah.
resources are always scarce. So
Sure.
in a bid to access these resources, the fallout of that is what you have happening in not just in Kaduna but in most of these communities. And then and because we have that creation
Yes.
that the colonial masters left us with, we also have the instrumentalization of these our differences by the political elite. It's also a very strong factor in most of these conflicts that we have in the country. So instead of amplifying the uniqueness and maximizing the benefits that we can get from our diversity as a people, the instrumentalization of these diversities has resulted into a situation where you have people bringing up tribes to feel that, okay, these ones are enemies. If you don't belong to my religion, it means you're my enemy and all that. So that creates an atmosphere already. And so though you have different cultures and ethnicities pretending to be living together, but there's always that palpable tension in the air which just waits for something to trigger it. So this trigger could be politics, it could be religion, it could be access to resources such as land or other mineral resources.
You mentioned ethnic differences, religion, political differences as well.
Yeah.
So are you trying to say in essence that this crisis actually has ethnic or religious political connotations behind it?
From what you hear, from what you see, and all that you come across as information about what is happening, there seem to be those colorations talking about tribe and religion. So because when people talk about the crisis, they are mentioning tribes, they are mentioning religion. So that is an obvious pointer that these colorations have something to do with what is happening up there. And like I said earlier, I also want us to look at that not just from that context, but also in the other parts of the country, where you have had similar communities experiencing similar issues in the past.
Okay, so sir, there've been talks, and a lot of people have been saying that some of these attacks or the attackers in question are not from within the country; they are from outside of the country. What do you feel? What do you think about this? Because I remember there was a statement made by the president a few years back, when he said that some of these people that invade our communities are not, they're not part of us. They invade our communities from countries like Libya and some other 10 West African countries that he mentioned. And the present governor of Kaduna State did actually buy
That
into the
argument.
statement. Yes.
Yeah.
So, what do you feel about this? Do you think these attackers are from outside of the country or within us?
Usually, I don't like to speculate or to speak when I don't have the facts. But like you said, the president said that, and one of the problems with the security of our country is the presence of ungoverned spaces. Our
Okay.
borders are so porous; people come in and out. And my organization has done quite a lot of work on the issues between farmers and herders, the violent confrontations between them. And like you said, even at the level of communities, you hear people saying that the people who attacked them looked in a certain way
Yes.
or appeared not to have originated from any portion of the geographical entity called Nigeria.
Yeah.
So that is a possibility if we recognize the fact that we have porous borders and there is limited or absolutely no control as to who gets
In or out.
or out of the country. So there's a possibility that you will have such happening as well.
Right. I'm going to ask this one last question before we actually take a quick break so we can take a breather. Now, it's from everything that's going on, it seems to be that this crisis has actually defied every possible solution that has been put on the table. Now, why would you what do you think is the reason for this? Because I remember, I think late last month the presidency did describe the security crisis in Kaduna as a complicated situation. They used the word complicated. So do you think it is complicated? How complicated do you think it is? Why do you think it has defied solutions so far?
Okay, thank you very much. But we started by recognizing that Nigeria is herself is very complex because of the diversity that we have in
Yeah.
terms of religion, ethnicity, and other demographic characteristics. But be that as it may, um, when people live together,
Yeah.
even as individuals. Now, remember that what the conflict we're talking about has to do with groups and communities. But even as individuals, when we live together, conflict is inevitable.
Yeah, it's bound
It
to
is
occur.
bound to happen. Now, but the factor that differentiates certain conflicts, like the example I gave between individuals and the others out there that keep reoccurring, is the management process. How do we manage these conflicts when they happen? Yes, it's complicated because our response to conflict is usually very funny. When it is brewing, no one says anything. It's there. And then when it happens, you send in troops in whatever form, the police, mobile police, the military, to quell, forgetting that there is a fundamental issue that is behind that conflict.
Yes.
Now, if you don't address the root causes of any conflict, it means that it will not go away. So that myself and you are fighting over a packet of biscuit, and maybe the studio manager slaps us and we get away. We just run away. It has not resolved the problem. So when you send the military to chase everyone fighting, and then you leave the fundamental issues that were responsible for the occurrence of the conflict in the first place, it means that even if it's 20 years later, when we meet, we are going to remember that we had a quarrel over a packet of biscuit. So there is this circle of hate because we don't have sound transitional justice processes that address the grievances and whatever losses people incur from conflict. So people keep the hate in the heart. So it's a circle. You have hate, then you have reprisals, you have revenge, and it's a continuous circle because of the failure of our conflict management mechanisms. And this happens at all levels. So when that happens, you also, because when communities have confrontations, the traditional conflict management structures are broken down.
Okay.
So the management process, or the process of trying to transform that conflict, has to take certain steps, of which one of them I said was identifying what the immediate cause, the root causes of the conflicts were, and trying to address them. None of that is done. Usually when that happens, you set up committees or commissions of inquiry, and then you have people testifying, white papers are written, and then they're there. We have conflicts in this country that have gone on for over 100 years, and they are still there because no one has
been able to get to the roots,
because and let's not forget that the fundamental reason why governments exist in the first instance is to provide for the welfare and the security of the citizenry. So if government is failing in that part to do that, which for one of the reasons which I mentioned, that government never takes time to sit down and try to understand why this conflict is persisting. And sometimes even when there is an understanding of what is responsible, then you have the political dimensions, you have the religious dimensions, and these are things that stir up emotions. So when a conflict happens, you see all kinds of reports in the media, and every party becomes a victim. So this group is saying they are attacking us, the other group is also saying they are attacking us, so everyone is playing the victim. So that is where it is expected that government comes in, and that is where organizations, civil society organizations, NGOs like ours also step in to try and understand what to do. And again, because security is in other local government, between that Bo and the Aguila people of other local government in Bo in the Bonny State. And one of the issues was that whenever it got to the demarcation of the boundary, then you start having this slowing down of activities. They are telling you there was no allocation for this to be done. And all that.
Obviously different reasons. A lot of people conflict over certain things. And I think for this particular case, some people have come out to say that the reason for this crisis here is because these invaders, or the people of Southern Kaduna actually, are saying that some of them are saying that these invaders are actually trying to steal their land from them, take their land from them, and they want it protected. They want their lives protected as well.
Now that it's possible, because you see that we have been talking about climate change. Climate change is real. So if you talk about herders, the major resource that they need is land for grazing. If you talk about farmers, the major resource they need is land for cultivation. So if we are not deliberately taking steps to address the issues of climate change, and teaching or building the capacities of whether herder communities or farmers communities to be able to adapt or mitigate some of the consequences of climate change, then we will have these kinds of conflicts going on and on. Like I told you, looking at the conflict, what is the root cause? What is the root cause? So if it's climate change, what is the government doing to address climate change in the country? So those are some of the issues.
All right, we'll talk more about it right after this break. Remember, this is still Even the Odds on your number one radio station. You can be part of the conversation. You can be part of what we're doing here at the program by following us across all social media platforms and dropping a comment on Facebook at www.facebook.com/African Patriot Radio. We're streaming live on YouTube as well at African Patriot Radio, and you can tweet at us on Twitter at African Patriot 7. My name is still Akanem, and I have with me Mr. Clifford Guy in the studio. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we will continue the discussion. Stick with us. Back, this is still Even the Arts and African Patriot Radio. My name is Akanem, and I have with me Mr. Guy in the studio, pardon me. And we've been talking about insecurity in the country, and our focus has been, or we're focusing more on the crisis in Kaduna. All right, so before we went on that break, you said quite a number of things about what the root cause, or some of the causes of this crisis might be, and some reasons. You gave some reasons why it's still pending. One of it was because you said, one of it was, according to what you said, was because we haven't been able to get to the root of the problem. Okay, now I want to ask you, sir, what do you think, or in your opinion, what do you think are some of the effects this crisis has had on the state, on its people? What do you think are some of the effects it's had on its economy, how the people live physically, psychologically, emotionally? Because a lot of people have lost their lives, a lot of people have lost their loved ones in this crisis. What effect do you think it has had on its people and state at large?
Like, thank you very much. Like every other conflict, I'll start with the people. It's devastating. You cannot begin to imagine what it feels like to live and do business in that part of the country right now. People have to live with the psychological trauma of seeing loved ones killed before them, seeing property they have worked their entire life to put together destroyed. Within the twinkle of an eye. You see people will go down with depression, and anxiety disorders, and other psychological problems. People will become emotionally unstable, and then again, as individuals, if you lose everything, you're thinking of survival. What do you eat? How do you take care of your family? Your loved ones are lost, and for some families, they lose the breadwinner. It means that they are going through very, very difficult times. So for individuals, it's a terrible thing to be in any location where there is that kind of violent conflict going on. And that is for adults. Let's look at children being exposed to that kind of carnage, being exposed to that level of violence. Now, and for me, in most instances, that is usually my fear, because when we look at the children who grow up in those places, now these events leave marks on them that we cannot erase, because at such a tender age, you see someone killed. Psychologically, it is going to stick to you, and it's going to invariably affect several other aspects of your life. Emotionally, you will not be normal. You'll never be the same again. Now, talking about the state, it means that for one, nobody wants to go to a conflict-prone area.
True.
So, and people need to go to places to do business. So it is going to affect businesses, and which will in turn affect the economy of the state, and not just that state, but in every other state where you have those kinds of confrontations, you see that there is an impact on the economy. And sometimes, it is easier to destroy than to build. And sometimes one conflict, the cost of recovery is such that some places are never able to fully recover back to what they were before the conflict happened. That is why we try as much as possible to let communities know that whatever differences, whatever issues you have, you should find ways of handling them rather than resorting to violence, because the destructions that come with violence, the consequences are so damaging that it takes a lifetime to recover. Imagine someone who worked all their life to put money together to build a house, and it's burnt down, and what that means. They are homeless,
Yes.
and sometimes they are no longer in their prime, where you
True.
say they will go back out there and make more money. So the consequences are usually better imagined than experienced.
Unexperienced.
Yes.
All right. Speaking of causes and effects of um, the Kaduna crisis on the people and the state at large. Now, I want to know how impressed are you with the way the government is handling this, the state government and the federal government alike? Because as of two days ago, the national president of the Southern Kaduna People's Union, the person of Jonathan Asake, he actually said the lack of political will on the part of the state government and the federal government was actually responsible for the persistent crisis right now. What do
Yes,
you feel about that?
I think I'll agree with him to an extent, because like we established earlier, that one of the fundamental reason why government exists is for the welfare and the security of people and their property.
Practice, yes.
So if you have had a conflict going on in a place
For years,
for years,
decades.
for decades, and it seems like the same thing happens at certain periods. Now, if you look at those conflicts, there's a pattern. You know that once the rains return and people are cultivating, then you have
Something starts.
these things start. So every year, you know exactly the period when this thing is likely to happen. Yet every year it goes on, and it's not just a conflict and peace building thing. It's a fundamental problem we have as a nation. You see that we don't have functional systems or mechanisms in place to deal with anything. So anything happens the way it wants to happen, and we are there politicizing, dramatizing, sensationalizing, and making it uh, like we actually enjoy that these things happen all the time. So like it becomes like a trade. So
Yeah.
and then the response is very predictable. It's the same. When it starts, you send troops to quell it. You set up a committee to come up with a white paper. At the end of the day, you throw it aside, and then all that. It shows that it has not been the priority
Yes.
of governance to address some of these issues. I don't know, and as someone who works in that field, sometimes I just sit and begin to imagine: is it because most of the decision makers are in well protected areas? They drive around with sirens, they are protected and all that, that they don't seem to understand what these communities go through at that level. I don't know. It's a question I've always asked myself. But even as an ordinary citizen, when you look at it, you know this thing happens. You've set up series of committees, you have
Yes.
conducted several investigations and all that. And then again, let's look at the arms of government that are responsible, the agencies of government that are supposed to offer protection and security.
Yes, I
Look at
was
the
going to
police.
ask about that. How effective, because despite the fact that these measures have been put in place, despite the fact that certain policies have been laid down, we still have this crisis ongoing. Now, lives have been lost. People would need or require justice for people, for their lives or their loved ones they have lost, for their properties that have been destroyed.
Damage, yeah.
How effective have these laws or these policies that have been put in place, these steps that the government, the state government, federal government are taking, how effective do you think they are?
They have obviously not been effective, because if they were, you won't even be sitting here in the first place. So let's start with security. Now, one of the problems we have in terms of security is we are very, very, very under-policed. We have the number of policemen we have in the country. Let's start with the number, the personnel. The number of policemen we have is inadequate. I go to communities, and sometimes an entire local government has less than 20 policemen. 20. Then you now begin to think about spaces, and even when they are there, how effective. Let's leave the community. Let's even talk about Abuja. What is the response time if something happens here right now and you call? what is the response time? Those are the things that make policing effective. So from the numbers, we are not there. The provision of whatever it is it takes to facilitate the work of policing is not there. So you have communities where their access to a policeman will take someone moving for up to 3-4 hours to get to the nearest policeman. That's a long time for anything to happen at community level. So it goes back to what the question you asked about, people coming from outside. Even if there are people coming from outside, the people who are supposed to respond when there's a distress call,
it means that there's a loophole. Security system is porous.
They are non-existent. So recently, something happened and about this policing thing. A colleague in another organization was kidnapped in one of the communities in the country, and he lived just a few blocks away from the police. And when the police were called that, these people came and took this man, they said that they don't have fuel in their vehicle to go there. So and you have communities, and so it goes back to what I said earlier. There are too many ungoverned spaces. So even if people are coming in, what can communities do? They don't have the capacity to resist or to face whoever it is that is coming to attack them. So what do we do? So that is on the aspect of security. And then looking at the other things you talked about, the transitional justice processes. Yes. So when these things happen, like every other thing that we do, it's not, like I said, it's a failure of our systems in all sectors. When these things happen, one, we live in a society in our country that is devoid of consequences. There are no consequences for anything. When someone does something, you just say about it, we talk about it, we scream about it, whether they are in or out of government, we scream and shout and make noise, and that is how it ends. So when we say people attacked communities, these are individuals. People saw them.
Yes.
They knew them. And yet nothing is done about it. So, and any society that does not have consequences, it means that people can do anything and get away with it. If I slap you here and nothing happens, it means when I come next time, I can slap everybody else in the station and walk away and nothing happens. So any society that is devoid of consequences, it's a fundamental problem. So it's not just in the area of peace building and conflict transformation. In every other aspect of our existence as a nation, there are no consequences for actions. So that is why even the people who fuel these things, the people who make statements, it's only in Nigeria that someone can go on air and say anything they want to say about a conflict or anything. People even come out to take responsibility. That we have had instances where people came out to say, yes, we were the ones that did this, and nothing happened.
Nothing was done.
So the absence of consequences is also a factor. And that is why I said that because it is the responsibility of governance to address issues of security, whatever conversations you have around this, you are still going to go back to look at the issues of governance.
Okay, sir. So in line with resolving this conflict, because it's an obvious conflict, in line with resolving this conflict and fostering towards peace, building peace, what would you say should be like a more lasting solution to this crisis?
I don't think I have the capacity to give a long-lasting solution, but I could proffer suggestions. Now, the first thing is, if we want to see an end to this sort of conflicts, we need to look at our security architecture. Yes, since last year, we started hearing about calls for policing at the community level. We said, okay, if government can no longer sustain or can no longer expand our existing policing structures to be able to cater for all the numerous ungoverned spaces that we have, why don't we take it to the communities, community policing? Let communities know that there is a role they can play in ensuring that they are safe. And for us as an organization, is one of the things that we do. We try to foster that relationship between communities and security agencies to let them understand that, okay, this is what you should do when you live in a community. When there are strangers, there are people you don't know hovering around, you need to find out what is it exactly that they are doing, what are they up to, and then report to the relevant authorities and say, okay, beforehand they have gotten the information, okay, we have certain people here, we don't understand what they're doing, can you help us come check them out? So even if it takes them a day or two to come, at least that will help to solve part of the problem, rather than waiting for communities to be attacked or for a dispute to grow into a violent confrontation before we start sending troops to quell. That's one. On the other part, there are alternative dispute resolution mechanisms. Now, at community level, when something happens, people report to the religious leaders, they want to look at the community leaders, they want to look at the traditional rulers and all that. Can we, as a country, begin to build the capacities of these people for alternative dispute resolution mechanisms? Let them know how to facilitate negotiations, let them know how to facilitate mediations, so that at that level, because the absence of this capacity is one of the reasons why when you have these issues, you even have people who you are expecting to be in positions of authority that should contribute to being the solution, making certain comments that rather escalate whatever it is that is happening at the community level. So as a country, can we begin to intentionally build the capacities of our duty bearers at community levels so that they understand that when you have a dispute, because believe you me, whether you like it or not, every conflict usually starts with two individuals. So at that level, can we begin to learn how to handle that? That is now. Secondly, thirdly, I'll also say that when we've put all this together and we have conflicts still emerging, can we have leaders who are responsible enough to understand that when something of this nature happens, you need to first calm everyone down. Let's calm down and sit down at the table and look at the causes. What is responsible for this? There are grievances. What are they? So community members or whatever the parties, whoever they are able to express their grievances. So this leads to what we're talking about, transitional justice processes. So if there's a conflict, rather than flogging everybody to run away, then can we have structures that will address this, will step in and say, okay, come, this issue is between the two of you. So can we hear from both sides? What is responsible? What do you think? And as development organizations, what we believe in community-driven solutions. So it is not from the top that you come and slap everyone and say, you do this, you no. What is it that you think we should do to make sure that this thing doesn't happen anymore? And then again, we also need to look at it holistically rather than looking at it as a Southern Kaduna issue. Can we begin to look at the nexus between other things and the conflicts that we experience? Like I gave you an example earlier, climate change, for instance. If we look at it critically, we'll see that the patterns of migration, of movements across the country in terms of farmers and herders relationships now, for instance. Now, the patterns of movements have changed over the years because climate change has led to things like the reduction in the amount of rainfall that is experienced. You have desert encroachment, especially in further north. And these things have increased the competition for resources which we agreed earlier that are always scarce. So how do we look at the nexus between this and that? So if you address some of these issues, will it perhaps solve some of the problems we're having? Another thing that we should look at the nexus between and the conflict is the issue of unemployment. um, governance has been so far and yet so near. So we have this huge pool of people who are supposed to be engaged in something, but they're not doing anything. If you travel around communities, I spend 70% of my time in rural communities, and I thought
Okay.
there are tons of young people. There are tons of young people, but the people who run this country, rather than looking for ways to gainfully employ these people or create opportunities or create an enabling environment, because of
Yes.
course government cannot provide employment for everyone, so creating an environment that will enable us to grow businesses and all that,
All
they
right.
don't do so. So you now see them engaging these young people in all
And
forms of violent and
criminal
criminal activities.
activities.
So you give weapons to people, and then you see the pattern. At the end of every election year, the following year, there's an upsurge in cases of kidnapping, armed robbery, and all that. If you don't need common sense, will tell you that there is something that happens during that process that leads to that.
Right.
So apart from those quick fixes that we are looking at, can we begin to look at the nexus between some of the other experiences within our
Yeah.
context and how
And
they are invariably feeding into
the
some of these
crisis.
crises that we have
All
at
right.
various levels?
Thank you very much, Mr. Cleve Guy. This has
Welcome.
been Even the Odds on African Patriot Radio. You heard it there. We've been talking about insecurity and we're focusing on the Kaduna crisis. And from what our guest in the studio today said, he said we need to look into the root cause of this problem before we can actually think of fostering or, you know, bringing up a solution to this to foster peace in our communities. And he's given a few ways that this can be achieved in our communities. Well, we're fast spent on time, and this is the size of our package today on Even the Odd. Stay tuned to African Patriot Radio. Join us next week on Wednesday at 1 p.m., where we'll be talking about other issues that concern us as individuals in this country. Coming up next is the Midday Convos here on African Patriot Radio. So stick with us.